I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Our Thursday roundtable is a conversation with dear friends and colleagues, and I'm pleased to begin today's program with the Honorable Burnell Venable Powell, my cousin and friend since birth. Burnell is the former dean of the University of South Carolina Law School, former dean of the University of Missouri at Kansas City Law School, has taught at, I believe, both at Harvard and at Chapel Hill at University of North Carolina. Burnell, good to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back with you.
And our colleague and friend and classmate from kindergarten, Brenda Lyle Gray, is here. And Brenda and I are working every day. She's producing a ton of copy for the newspaper, writing stories that come out of these conversations. We do this program every day with different themes and different players each day. And Brenda has the assignment and has taken on the task of chronicling, documenting these conversations. So Brenda, good to see you and thank you for your work. Thank you for your passion and your vision. But I'm not sure who else will join us today. I think it's good from my point of view to be reflective and to talk about, since the three of us are here and have a common experience with all of us from kindergarten, let's talk about our growing up days and how we got to where we are right now, if that makes sense to you, Brenda, and to you, Burnell. But before I do that, Burnell, what issues are top of mind that you're watching in the news today, locally, globally?
I'm focused on the negotiations over the Biden Build Back Better plan. Those who are being called moderates in the Democratic Party seem to be ready to blow up the Biden initiative. Biden's asking for 3.5 billion and
3.5 trillion.
3.5 trillion. Yeah, the numbers are big, and he's asking for 3.5 trillion, and Senator Manchin and his friends are saying that that's way too much, and they would like to see something closer to, I think, 1.75 or something like that. I heard Senator Sanders indicate that his wing of the party has already come down from 6.2 trillion, and that he thinks that the burden ought to be on Manchin and his friends to come up with a proposal that is viable. And as I watch this, I'm struck by two things. One is what easy fodder it is for the commentators, political commentators, to say, well, the Democrats are in control of the presidency in both houses, and they can't come to an agreement. And this is just really terrible. Well, the first thing is that the Democrats may be in control of all three branches, but they still have not removed the filibuster. And if they can't remove the filibuster, then they are not really in a position to push through their legislation. If they push it through on the basis of some sort of budget reconciliation, they will be able to do it, but by the slimmest of margins. They can't lose, I think, I don't think they can lose a single senator. And so that means that the power is in the hands of the lowest common denominator. And that means that the Democrats are in danger of tanking the centerpiece of the Biden administration. That being the case, if the Democrats can't at least demonstrate that when they do have the presidency, that they can do something with it, it is going to look bad for Democrats in the future, and it's going to look bad for the country. It's absolutely imperative, particularly at a time when Biden's poll numbers have dropped, not precipitously, but they nevertheless have dropped down to about 43%. And the country is divided something like 70% in favor of what he wants to do and 30% opposed. And you would think that with the numbers and with the popular support, Democrats could get something done. If they can't get it done, it's going to be very difficult to say going forward that they ought to be in control in Washington.
But the disconnect really is with the moderates and not where you would think Bernie's wing would be the place where there would be disruption, but there's not.
No.
And I think the president has properly crafted a strategy and a bill that encompasses and supports the progressive agenda of Bernie's wing of the party. And so it is surprising that someone like Joe Manchin and other so-called moderates now, who have been champions of the big tent idea, find themselves in a position to not support or to seriously modify downward the movement that the administration is trying to make. Yeah. And so, what is it in the Democratic Party makeup that makes itself so vulnerable to its own shooting itself in the foot every time?
Yes, well, the second point that I was going to make is that Will Rogers said sometime, I guess, in the mid-40s that I belong to no organized political party. I'm a Democrat. And these days, we're acting as though the Democratic Party is doing something different than it has always done. As a big tent party, it has always been a party that has required negotiations between its left and its right wing, and that's the case today. I think that the only thing that is different today than it was in the 40s and 50s is that the Republican Party has become such a single-minded, ultra-right-wing party, so that unlike in the old days, you might be able to count on a dozen or so individuals coming forward from the Republican Party to help a cause that 70% of the American population supports. Today, that's not the case. The Democrats can expect no votes on any of their initiatives, including the scariest situation of all, that the debt limitation comes up in less than a week. And unless the debt ceiling can be raised, there will be a shutdown of the federal government. And that means the Social Security checks will stop flowing. Veterans Administration hospitals will have to close down. Just a whole host of horribles. And yet, the Republican Party seems poised to foist that kind of disaster on the country, as they've done before. I mean, they have to be taken seriously because they've done it before. And I simply hope that if, in fact, they do it again, that the country will hold them accountable. But that's looking way down the road, and that won't get us out of the hole that the country's in right now. This is a situation in which the country has not really invested in its middle class for about 40 years. When Reagan took over, the shift or the focus of the country became a focus on corporate interests and the cutting of taxes and the embracing of the interests of wealthy activists on the right. And as a result, we haven't built bridges, we haven't put money into schools, we haven't built housing. We're in a housing situation now where if you're a seller, you're in a pretty good position today. Well, the reason why that's so is because we haven't been building any houses.
Right.
And that kind of investment in the country just has not been going on. Biden comes along and says, okay, it's now time to get that done. And instead of trying to nickel and dime it, we ought to go out and spend the money that ought to be spent. And the response of the Republican Party is, we're never going to help you on that. If you want to do it, you have to do it entirely by yourself. And then we get back to the situation of the Democratic Party being a big tent party and having to negotiate between its left and its right, even to get things done that the country and the party have said that they are committed to getting done.
And within that entire scenario, there is the memory that Republicans were on spending steroids under Triumph, under Trump. But at the same time, now they call for the balanced budget. How does the debt ceiling situation play out in terms of philosophy and strategies and positions of the two parties? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I think we have to understand what the debt ceiling is. The debt ceiling is an artificial vote that Congress put in place that requires that there be basically a political vote in order to spend the money to pay for the debt that the country has already incurred. So if the vote is negative, then that means that the country is voting not to pay its debts. And if that happens, that shakes the entire economy. The bond rating, the ability of the country to borrow money, it goes down. The functioning of the government ends up stopping. It is a scary situation. When that happens, any calamity is possible. And the worst thing about it is that because the dollar is the currency of the world, if we choose not to pay our debts, what we are saying is that the dollar can no longer be trusted as the stable currency of the world. And certainly, the Chinese would like to have their currency be the currency of the world. I'm sure that there are others, the European Union might even be willing to step forward and say, that the euro ought to be the currency of the world. But the fact of the matter is that in the world as it exists today, the U.S. is in the best position because it is a stable economy. It also has the ability to handle any debt situation. But if the U.S. decided, for instance, that its debt load was such that it needed to raise taxes, there's more than enough wealth in this country that it could raise taxes in order to meet its debt obligations. Mm-hmm. Or if the country decided simply that it was going to print more money, it could do that. And the world would not lose faith because the world would know that in reserve is this taxing ability. And so you can continue to accept the dollar as being stable and go with it. And that's what's at stake if we decide that we're going to default on our debts. the confidence of the world. The dollar is only as valuable as the confidence that it generates. And what the Republicans are doing is going to the very heart of our economy, that confidence in the dollar.
And that's the question, Brunel. What does it mean? Why is that the Republican position? Whose interests are being served by challenging the stability of the dollar from this side by creating policy that means we default on national debt and therefore are perceived around the world as unstable, unreliable, and at risk for having the dollar being supplanted as the currency of the world?
Well, this is yet another instance in which the Republican Party is playing the short game. It doesn't care about what happens down the road. Its view is, let's score as many points as we can right now, and we'll deal with the rest of this later, no matter how calamitous. We've just gone through 4 years of that kind of leadership under the former presidency. To hell with our allies, to hell with the rest of the world, to hell with making decisions that benefit the American public. What we want is what we want, and we'll take that right now, and we'll deal with any fallout later. That's why they could go forward with huge tax cuts on behalf of the wealthy, despite the fact that the country itself needed to spend money on infrastructure and all of its other needs, family support, expansion of medical coverage, spending money to build schools and highways and refinance the electric grid. Those things don't mean anything when your real purpose is simply to get control of power. And if you are bent on simply getting control of power, you use every tool that is available to you to do that.
Including choking government down, crippling the economy, and feeling that you're going to be better off by picking up the pieces and fashioning and shaping and serving your interest, not the interest of the nation.
Yes, and if it, in order to quote unquote win, it takes attacking the nation's first Black president and simply saying we will not cooperate with him. That's what you do, and you ask yourself, well, does that make any sense in the long run? Is that going to benefit the nation? The answer is we don't care. What we want is power right now, today, and we'll deal with the rest of this afterwards. And so that's really what we're looking at next week. And the scary thing is that the Biden presidency is now at a flex point. The honeymoon is over. He's had his several months of people basically saying, well, we'll go along with him and we'll be nice to him. Now the gloves are off, and it's simply a question of whether he's prepared to fight back. I think we'll know by next week this time whether he's a fighter or whether he's bound to be a footnote to history.
And so, what are the indicators you're going to be looking for to make that assessment?
Well, I'm first of all going to look to how he handles Manchin, Senator Manchin from West Virginia. Under other presidents, a president like Lyndon Johnson would call Manchin in and he would tell Manchin essentially, you can be with me or you can be my enemy. And if you're my enemy, I'm going to throw everything possible. If I go down, and since my presidency is at stake, if I go down, you can bet you will go down with me. So if you're seeking some solution that basically is designed to keep you or to protect you in your Senate run in West Virginia, know this, that if I go down, you will not win that Senate seat.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't seen a politician as tough as Lyndon Johnson, as bare knuckles as Lyndon Johnson since Lyndon Johnson. And the Biden agenda, interestingly enough, is the most progressive agenda that this nation has seen since the Johnson era. So the question is Joe Biden simply Lyndon Johnson light, or is he Lyndon Johnson for real? So that will be one thing. Another thing will be what is going to happen with the voting rights legislation. The effort to come up with some sort of compromise legislation that will allow the federal government to essentially set standards for how voting is to take place in federal elections is a crucial fight. And the Democrats are only going to be able to win that fight if they can figure out a way to do it through budget reconciliation, which I think is very doubtful, or they do it through modification of the filibuster rule in some respect, if not just completely getting rid of the filibuster rule. But the Democrats are going to have to do something about that, and that's one of the things that I'm looking to. What are they going to do? Now, just this week, we saw that the collapse of the reform of police practices. The Democrats have been working with Senator Scott of my home state to come up with a compromise. And they've been working for weeks and thinking that they could come up with some sort of compromise. And just within the last 48 hours, it's announced efforts to come up with compromise legislation on police reform now appear to be dead. Some, like me, would have said from the very beginning, Tim Scott is not someone who is interested in real reform. What Tim Scott, as a senator, is interested in is doing something that makes it appear that the Republican Party is open to reform without ever having truly to concede any point of substance. And so while he was willing to engage in discussions around the edge when it came right down to it, and the question was, are we going to hold police officers, for instance, accountable in civil lawsuits? That was never going to happen with Tim Scott. And one of the reasons why it was never going to happen was that Tim Scott and the Republican Party were never really open to broader reform. And so there always had to be some issue that they could point to as the reason why they were killing the negotiation without specifically addressing some of the other issues that were involved in that deal.
What were the issues or the positions taken in that negotiation?
Well, I don't remember all of the things that were at stake, but the chief one was, of course, how are we going to handle police officers who engage in acts of brutality? Are we going to simply immunize them from ever having to be personally accountable, so that the only accountability that could be directed at them would be through their position as a police officer, so that you could go after the police department, but not the specific officers who choked the person, who clubbed the person, who shot the person. And the Republican position was, you should never be able to go after the police officer. You should only be able to go after the department. And that's just, that is a system that simply has not worked. They were willing to indicate support of things like putting more money into police training. Well, everybody's in favor of police training.
Sure.
But we haven't seen the killing of people of color over the last year, because police weren't trained to know that you shouldn't take the life of a person who is not threatening. That has never been the issue. So.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is my Thursday edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane, a rich conversation with Professor Burnell Powell. Burnell Powell is the retired dean of the University of South Carolina Law School and the University of Missouri, Kansas City Law School. And Burnell, I'm really enjoying the conversation. Here with me as well, Brenda Lyle Gray, for our listeners and viewers. Brenda, Burnell, and I were all in kindergarten together. And so it's really a pleasure to have this conversation some years after our beginning engagement in elementary or preschool. Burnell, one of the people that's watching right now, Michelle Madison, she's a regular here, noted that the Haitian issue is a major concern for her. And she notes that Congresswoman Maxine Waters and others from the CBC are speaking about the situation that's occurring right now in Texas on the border. The situation between Democrats and Republicans is getting annoying, she says. Are you following that at all? What's happening on the border with the Haitian refugees?
Well, it is so disgraceful that it's hard not to follow it. I mean, you've got to see it. I mean, the imagery of police power on horseback whipping at black folks is just abhorrent. It would be abhorrent regardless of the color, but given our nation's history, it is doubly so in this instance. The other thing is that what the chaos around the border with the Haitians and with others really reflects is that we do not have an immigration policy that makes sense. Our immigration policy is supposed to provide for an opportunity of anyone who presents themselves to the U.S. Asking for asylum to have an opportunity to hear their claim that they are seeking asylum. And the Republican Party, under the Trump administration, put in rules that basically said, we're not interested in supporting that policy. One of the things that they did was to require that those who were seeking asylum in the U.S. first apply for asylum beyond our borders, and then wait to hear from us. That's not that's not the way our laws have been interpreted, at least not until this Supreme Court stepped in and said that, well, it's all right to reach an agreement with another country that they'll hold those immigrants there, and we will then process them through that other country. If it were a ballot process, if people really were being held in safe, humane circumstances in another country, it might make some sense to rely on it. And that might be consistent with our notions of processing immigrants and giving them a chance to present their case. But what we know is that the circumstances under which they are being held are inhumane. Those Haitians at the border, they're on the Mexican side. Mexico doesn't have the resources to deal with them. Mexico is not investing in them, and we're not giving Mexico adequate funds in order to process those individuals and to hold them humanely. And this has, been the situation now for 2 or 3 decades.
Mm-hmm.
We can't reach agreements on establishing a sensible immigration policy. We can't deal with the children who are resident in our own country, individuals who are resident in our own country, many of them adults today, but who were brought to this country as children, had no choice in whether they were going to be brought here, have grown up in this country, have been educated in this country, in some instances have fought for this country, and yet we can't find a mechanism where we can expedite their citizenship and acknowledge that they are American citizens as much as anybody else who has spent the last 20 years in this country.
So what does it mean, when you consider the immigration impact of our withdrawal in the past month from Afghanistan, the likelihood that at minimum 100,000 or more Afghans who supported our war effort in that country will be resettled in this country, promised, and I think if we act on the promise, that's a good thing. But so here is an ability to do something, at least partly, but while we're doing that, we're confronted with another process, another emerging crisis of people who, like the ones we are onboarding from Afghanistan, are fleeing a horrific experience in their country of origin, Haiti in particular. I mean, there's the double standard here. Does that become more clear as these things happen at the same time? Does this go back to thinking about the Marielitos in Cuba?
Yes.
Yeah, because that was a group of Black Cubans more than white Cubans, and we had a different posture towards that group of people. What do you think?
Well, I think first of all that we have not been welcoming to people of color. There have been increases in the number of immigrants of color from around the world, but even as that has been happening, there has been a growing drumbeat, a growing hostility against people of color coming into this country. And you mentioned the Afghans who are coming in. I think it is yet another example of the notion of the short-term view, win on the political issue and worry about the consequences later. The reason I say that is that note what's happening. Biden is being basically beat up on for the way in which he left Afghanistan and the way in which the country left Afghanistan. And one of the main accusations is we're not helping and standing by all of our friends, and they should have our support. And then when Biden succeeds in, removing 100,000 Afghans and sending them around the world on the promise that they will be processed, and if they want to come to this country, they will be able to come. The position of the Republicans is, no, we don't want them here. We don't want more immigrants here. So they seek to have it both ways. At the formal level, they can say all the nice things about protecting our allies and our friends and those who have stood by us, and in the quiet and in the darkness, they are shouting from the corners, we don't want more foreigners here. We don't want the browning of America. Mm-hmm. There are short-term gains to be had by that kind of policy. But the fact of the matter is that this country needs immigration. And that's the debate that hasn't really been had. The fact of the matter is that this country is a middle class country in terms of its wealth and its standing in the world. And what do we know about countries once they become middle class? People stop having babies. They begin to organize themselves voluntarily through a process of trying to maximize their family's achievements. And that means that you see births decline. That being the case, if you look at the demographics of this country, the country is graying. There are more and more people like me, who are baby boomers, who are now coming, who have already, for the most part, retired. The next generation is retiring. They have fewer children. And what does that mean? It means that the workforce that you need to produce a dynamic economy simply isn't there. Where are those people going to come from? They're going to come through immigration. The prime example of that is that you can look at California. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. I mean, just think about that, the 5th largest economy in the world. And which country, not which country, but which state in this country has been most impacted by immigration? California. That's how they have been able to stimulate their economy, to create a larger pool of people, not only to work, but to buy products and to invest in the country. And we've got to do that nationwide. And the Republican Party is standing in the way of that. And they are looking back to the 30s and 40s and trying to put in place an America that is based on race and, as they say, blood and soil among the ultra right wing. Not the Republican Party, but many who sympathize with the approach of the Republican Party. We want blood and soil, as the basis of citizenship, when in fact the country is a country of the post-70s. And what we need are people who are willing to invest in the country and people who the country can invest in. And that will lead to a growing economy. And in a growing economy, everybody benefits from that. But you first have to get over your simplistic racist notions and begin to talk about the world as it exists today and who our competitors are. And you've got to be able to look at countries around the world that are struggling. For instance, the Japanese economy. The Japanese have been able to maintain an economy that is essentially based upon, working males of Japanese origin. Well, what the Japanese are finding is that that's not working, and that they've now had to bring in workers from around the world and sort of create a second class of citizenship. They are rethinking that. They've got to have something that's more dynamic than this.
But who doesn't think that way, or maybe they do, I would say, is the Chinese. Now, the question of growth and expansion, of growing an economy, and as you were speaking, Brunel, I was thinking about the ongoing talk and historical relationship between North America, the U.S., and Europe, Northern Europe, that there has been a stated under Trump preference for bringing in immigrants from Northern Europe. The history has been Europeans, read white, have been welcome, and non-whites not welcome. That is the challenge, though, because of the nature, the demography of the planet itself. So then, on the other hand, how does it play that there are discussions between the U.S. and Australia, and I think the UK, firming up policy and posture in the Asian Pacific Rim, being sensitive to the growth and the movement of Chinese. And are Chinese going to do differently from Japanese in World War II? Have they discovered a capacity to bring culture, opportunity, commerce that grows their economy to the world differently outside of the mechanism of war, but it's domination nonetheless? What do you think? And does that conversation play into the one we're having right now? I think it does, but what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that it's at least related. I mean, the Chinese know that they have to have trading partners around the world, and they know that they have to have markets for their production, and they are aggressively seeking to expand as they build their economy. But one of the things that we also have with respect to the Chinese is that there you're dealing with a population of 1 billion people. And so the notion, I mean, even while they could probably be even more productive if they could continue to expand their middle class and create internal markets that work as efficiently as those in the West work, they have a large margin for error simply because they have so many people. And the Chinese are going around the world and trying to cut deals that are favorable to the Chinese, that are favorable in terms of creating markets for their goods. They have been aggressively trying to woo Australia, for instance, and there is a political bloc in Australia that is open to that. China is an economic competitor, and I don't think that it can be anything other than an economic competitor, except a military competitor. And we really don't want to have to compete with the Chinese in terms of the military, because no one is going to win in that kind of effort. Nuclear powers have no business fighting with each other. They should be talking and negotiating with each other. But when you are doing things such as telling your foreign investors that they can only invest in your country if they are willing to eventually turn over the intellectual property of your company in exchange for the right to be able to vote there. I mean, not vote there, but to operate there. When they are engaged in the most sophisticated economic espionage in the world, when those kinds of things are going on, this is not a level playing field. This is not an environment in which you are engaged in economic competition. This is underhanded warfare. And that has to be met. That has to be responded to, because we know that if you can establish an economic uh, grip in a country, then you have the basis for moving forward with eventually a political grip, and being able to treat the country not as simply a trading partner, but as a subservient to you. The Chinese are not in a situation in which they have economic partners so much as they have debtors who work with them. This country actually does have economic partners, and sometimes we treat them fairly, unlike the way we treated the French over the last week. Sometimes we actually do treat our partners fairly, and we sit down and we talk about mutual interests, and we try to end up with resolutions that, to the extent possible, are able to benefit both parties. That's the kind of relationship that I hope that we can have with China going forward, but it's not one which I think the Chinese are committed to.
Got about 10 minutes. I wanted to come back and ask Brenda to weigh in. I don't know, Brenda, if you've watched the television coverage of the treatment of the Haitians at the border. And if you have, what impressions have you had? What feelings are generated by what you've seen our country do in dealing with this crisis of Haiti? Have you watched it at all, Brenda? You're muted. Unmute if you would.
I watched a little this morning, but I just couldn't stomach it because I know they're being returned.
And so describe what you watched, if you will, and how it's affecting you and your sensibility of what justice should look like.
They were walking across some of the muddy river, holding kids on their shoulders, and knowing that they were I think it's about 5,000 left, and knowing they were being returned. It's painful to watch, but people of color in America are being returned in a different way, with all of the voids and all of the lacks that we had as baby boomers, even though we had the separation and the division, but we had hope. Those people were leaving without knowing what the next day is going to be. And I've just gotten to the point where it's just hard to watch. You can just take so much of the abuse.
So Brunel, jump in with your history hat, if you would, and talk about Haiti and why Haiti is significant in the hemisphere and significant as one of the scenes out of which the end of the modern slave trade emerged, but then the consequences for that island and for Black people have not ended. What's your sense?
Is it a curse? Is it a curse? Have you heard that? That there is a curse that is surrounding Haiti?
I don't believe that.
Well, they were talking about all of the hurricanes and you know, where the United States and especially Trump just literally said, not going to help, no humanitarian aid, that type of thing.
Well, if it's a curse, it's the action of people. That's what you mean.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But no, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if we're talking about figuratively, there's a curse.
Oh no.
I think there's an argument to be made for that. I mean, after all, they led the first revolution in the Western Hemisphere against colonialism, and ended up having to pay their colonial power for the colonial power's loss of of their colony for all practical purposes. And they didn't have the resources to pay it then, and they've never gotten out of debt since then. So Haiti is a country today that bears years and years, centuries of abuse on its shoulders, and it's never really gotten it right. And we are in a situation with Haiti where it's hard to know even how one would get it right. But for a country to undergo two hurricanes and a coup, assassination of a president within a short period of time, when the country is already and a pandemic epidemic, when the country is already poor, undereducated, and doesn't have a healthcare system that can support the needs of the country, is just absolutely tragic. And if one wants to call that a curse, figuratively, I would say that's a pretty good example. But if we can see the horror, we can address it. And we may not be able to resolve it, but it is clear that if we are not trying to address it, we have no possibility of resolving it.
And so it brings me to always discussing the critical role that I think Africans in the United States, African Americans, U.S. citizens, but the descendants of Africa have played and can play in both creating awareness about Haiti and Africa, and how that in a reciprocal fashion creates opportunity and awareness and advancement for our people here within this country. That's what I think. I think that our civil rights movement as we knew it was in part both in tandem, fueled by and fueling the liberation movements, the independence movements in Africa, which in turn inspired continued engagement, advancement, movement into the political realm by Black men and women in this country. And it moved us from having to have a exclusive dialogue with white power. It brought more components into the conversation, and the more components, the more of reality that could be engaged, the greater the opportunity, I think, for us to advance. What do you think about that, Brunel?
Well, I would just add one other thing. I think that the strength of African Americans and the strength of Blacks in the African diaspora has always been the certainty that if you do what we are asking, if you speak and act in terms of justice with respect to us, it not only benefits us, but it benefits everybody. And those who have opposed us on civil rights, on economic reform, on issues of environmentalism, on immigration, those who have opposed us have never been able to come up with a response that negates that position. And so African Americans are at the center of this because we are at the center of what are viable solutions for everybody. At that point, I should also say that if you haven't read Heather McGhee's book, The Sum of Us, she makes that point in in detail, looking at the United States and its relationship to people of color and to blacks specifically in detail. That what has been asserted on behalf of blacks has not simply been a statement that we ought to have a healthcare system to take care of blacks. It's been we need a healthcare system. Blacks know that, but it is the entire country that will benefit from that.
We're going to leave it there. A wonderful conversation, Brunel. Thank you so very much. Brenda, thank you for being here. And thanks to those who are listening and watching on YouTube, on Facebook, the McFarlane Media Facebook channels, on Black Press USA Facebook. If you like this conversation, we want you to be a part of it. Join us every week. We're doing this one on Thursdays at 1 o'clock Central Time. You can be a part of this conversation. We want to hear your voice. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you.
Now.
Good seeing you.
Pleasure.
Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you on the ground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you break.
We've had enough
of all the money you make.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait.
Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you were breaking.
We had enough
of all the money you were making.
We had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We had enough.
This is a proclamation.
Free or guilty,
It's gonna get filthy.
better believe. Just roll up your sleeves.
It's gonna get rough. It's gonna be tough.
We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough
Of all the rules you're breaking.
We've had enough.
All the money you're making.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is the proclamation.
We've had enough.
Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice.
We've had enough.
Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price.
We've had enough.
Philando, Breonna, George Floyd.
What? We've had enough.
So many gone, how can we fill the void?
How can we feel?
We had enough. John Crawford, I know you've heard.
We've had enough.
Sandra Bland, come on and take a stand.
We've had enough.
Sean Bell,
Sean Bell.
what the hell?
We've had enough.
Freddie Gray, did you hear what I said?
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.